In mid-2019, Randy Constant was found guilty of wire fraud and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Over a span of 7 years, Randy took advantage of lax federal regulations and scammed his way to a multi-million-dollar fortune. For years, Randy sold fake organic products to millions of unsuspecting people. If you purchased organic soybeans and corn within the last decade, odds are Randy cheated you too. This is the story of how Randy Constant became an organic food tycoon, cheated millions of Americans, and amassed a $140 million fortune in the largest organic grain scam in U.S. history. Randy Constant was born and raised in the home of sliced bread, Chillicothe, Missouri. Randy excelled in school throughout grammar school and in high school became a standout athlete. He would later attend the University of Missouri, majoring in agricultural economics. Upon graduating, Randy married Pam, his high school sweetheart and future wife of 39 years. Randy picked up work in agriculture, working for several companies before returning home to Chillicothe to pursue his own venture in organic farming. Randy and his business partner Glenn Borgerding had previously worked together and created a new business together called Organic Land Management. The two found immediate success and doubled their net worth every year for 5 years. Suddenly, in 2006, the two experienced a slowdown which resulted in losing their operating loan lender. Losing their ability to borrow money, Randy and Glenn decided to part ways after succumbing to financial troubles. Glenn couldn't help but wonder how things fell apart so quickly, and suspected that Randy was somehow at the root of all the troubles. Glenn would later learn just how greedy and dishonest Randy would become. While doing business with Glenn, Randy created a separate company where he could profit as a sole proprietor. Siphoning grain from Organic Land Management, Randy would wholesale the stolen grain to other providers, building a clientele for himself. The stolen grain led to decreased Organic Land Management sales, which would ultimately lead to the demise of the joint venture. The damage was done, however, Randy was well on his way to creating his organic food empire. For 7 years, Randy would buy grain, repackage, and sell the purchased grain as organic. He would be credited with selling 11.5 million bushels of non-GMO corn and soybeans, and nearly all of it was falsely labeled as organic. Randy's grain production and quick success would raise eyebrows. How could someone produce so much organic grain and sell it for so cheap? Competing farmers would begin to think. It was impossible for him to have done that legitimately. He didn't have access to enough organic crop acres to supply so many bushels. An anonymous tip to the USDA would shed light on Randy's scheme. For many years, the inspection system had failed to detect Constant's fraudulent scheme. Now the feds were onto him. To fully understand how Randy was able to cheat the system, one must first have an understanding of how USDA organic certification works. According to the USDA, one seeking certification is required to meet the following 5 organic standards. The organic crop production standards require that land must have had no prohibited substances applied to it for at least 3 years before the harvest of an organic crop. Soil fertility and crop nutrients will be managed through tillage and cultivation practices, crop rotations, and cover crops, supplemented with animal and crop waste materials and allowed synthetic materials. Crop pests, weeds, and diseases will be controlled primarily through management practices, including physical, mechanical, and biological controls. When these practices are not sufficient, a biological, botanical, or synthetic substance approved for use on the national list may be used. Operations must use organic seeds and other planting stock when available. The use of genetic engineering, ionizing radiation, and sewage sludge is prohibited. The USDA also requires that the product being sold as organic must undergo testing to prove that said product is indeed organic. Organic farmers are required to hire independent private inspectors to audit the product in order to receive organic labeling. Any inspector with a license administered by the USDA can be hired. Now one question remains: how is it that with all of the rules, regulations, audits, and inspections could someone claim a product to be organic when it isn't, and do so for almost a decade? The answer to the previously stated questions are simple. Randy would hire an auditor and schedule an appointment to be inspected. During the inspection, Randy would provide organic samples to be tested. Surely organic samples would prove to be legitimate, and as a result, Randy would pass. Randy knew the inspectors in his region and had great relationships with them. Randy also knew that the system was flawed. If by chance, someone was suspected of fraudulent activity, a USDA inspector would be assigned to follow up on the claim. Claims were often ignored and took years to resolve. The USDA Inspector General's office had 4 agents who oversaw the nation's 5,000 organic farms. Oftentimes, the inspections were inadequate and rarely discovered fraudulent activity. Randy knew this and took advantage of the system. Randy's farm never provided proof of any fraudulent activity. During a raid, all of Randy's paperwork was seized. It was Randy's paperwork that would ultimately prove that he was engaging in a scam. It was determined that Randy was purchasing non-organic grain from several nearby suppliers and passing that product on as organic. His co-conspirators knew what was taking place, but Randy paid them off to continue in the scheme. Randy and his co-conspirators would be found guilty of fraud and be sent to prison. Randy, the orchestrator of the scam, would be sentenced to 10 years in prison and fined $120 million. After sentencing, Randy was given time to turn himself in. Prior to facing his fate in federal prison, Randy idled his car in his garage and ended his life after being poisoned by carbon monoxide. Randy Constant's case remains as the largest organic grain scheme in U.S. history. After his case was exposed, promises to revise the USDA organic rules, regulations, inspections, and processes have been made. Those promises have so far gone unfulfilled, and not much has changed. While you may never know if the product you are consuming is truly organic, you'll sleep better at night knowing that even if it isn't, you'll be alright. Randy Constant is another example of how an ordinary and otherwise good person can fall victim to greed and succumb to the pressures of living out the American dream. If this is your first time tuning in, drop a like and consider subscribing. Don't forget to check out the other videos in the channel. See you on the next one. Thanks for watching.